What does 2026 have in store for us? A lot could happen in space this year, but let's be realistic about what will actually happen. Last year, the space industry delivered a lot of drama and excitement, a record number of launches, stunning views of other worlds, and a multitude of breakthroughs and failures. But there's already an issue about that on channel, which you can view via the link in the upper right corner. 2026 promises to be another exciting year in space. For the first time in more than 54 years, astronauts have been training to travel to the edge of the moon, perhaps within the next few months. NASA, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and other companies are preparing to take big steps before the actual landing of humans on the moon, perhaps for several years. New rockets are set to debut in 2026, and scientists hope to open new windows into the universe. In this issue, I'll talk about the most anticipated space missions planned for this year. I'll also assess the chances that these missions will actually happen, will take place over the next 12 months. Well, almost all missions to be exact. Before we go any further, let me take a moment to thank you. This channel doesn't exist on its own. It is based on people who believe in the power of knowledge and support the idea of accessible science. Sincere gratitude to sponsors and patrons. It is thanks to your financial support that we can simply talk qualitatively about complex things, about the universe, science, and our place in them. Thank you to everyone who likes, comments, and shares the video. This is not a formality or a trifle. This is real support that helps the channel stay on track and move forward. A special thanks to Serhiy for an important contribution to the development of Ukrainian popular science content and constant support for ET project. If you also want to be part of this movement and help the channel grow, all links, as always, are waiting for you in the description. And if you like the popular science format and want to understand the world better, subscribe to the channel will be useful not only for me, but also for you. You will not miss new releases, and YouTube algorithms will understand that such content has a place in the feed. The ambitious goal is 100,000 subscribers in 2026 year. And each new subscription is another step towards this goal and to even deeper, bolder stories about science, space, and the future. I would be very grateful for your support. Artemis II final preparations for the Artemis II mission are well underway at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Rocket, the Space Launch System, and Orion spacecraft were fully integrated inside the vehicle assembly building. Moreover, the SLS rocket has already been moved to Launch Complex 39B for dress rehearsal of the countdown. And I talked about this, by the way, in one of the last news releases. Then, perhaps, in February, the Artemis II mission is set to launch from Florida's Space Coast on a 10-day flight that will deliver astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen to the far side of the moon and back to Earth. This will be the first manned flight of the SLS rocket and the Orion capsule. And as I said before, even if delays prevent a February launch, Artemis II has every chance of launching in the spring or summer. From this, we can conclude that the probability of Artemis II happening in 2026 90% this year, maybe even more, but we will be somewhat pragmatic. Starship refueling demonstration. The next mission on our list is on SpaceX's Starship roadmap by 2026. Demonstration of large-scale orbital refueling is key to revealing the ability of the Elders to travel beyond low Earth orbit. SpaceX must master refueling capability before sending seniors to the moon to fulfill contract companies with NASA regarding the lunar lander. The same applies to SpaceX's future plans for Starship flights to Mars. This first demonstration before refueling will involve 2 launches, Starship from separate launch pads in Texas or possibly Florida. The ships will dock in orbit, and one of them will attempt to transfer supercooled methane fuel and liquid oxygen to the other. Cryogenic refueling on this scale has never been done in space before, and it's really a serious challenge. And this, given certain nuances that constantly arise with this ship. I will assess the likelihood of holding a demonstration before refueling in 2026 at 50%. Like that dinosaur you might meet on streets, or you may not meet them. Starship capture. We won't stray far from these ships, as SpaceX plans to introduce the next version of Starship, Starship V3, with first test flight within the next few months. The first flight of the older B3 will be very similar older than previous test flights. The rocket will launch from South Texas and make a suborbital flight half the world with a precision landing in the ocean. If all goes well, SpaceX could take the next step in the development. Starship is already on its next flight. It will involve the launch of Starship, the largest rocket in the world, into low Earth orbit, with the subsequent return of the ship to enter the atmosphere over northern Mexico and returning to the SpaceX test site at Starbase, Texas. There, the ship will be captured directly at the launch pad using giant mechanical arms, similar to after SpaceX had already intercepted the Super Heavy booster. Successful the capture would be a huge step towards the complete multiplicity of the Elder. And here, the brainchild of Musk and his engineers is doing somewhat better. Therefore, the probability of a successful deoccupancy rate for older people in 2026 is about 70%. Blue Moon Mark 1. Now for SpaceX's competitors. Blue Origin's first lunar lander is a real giant. In the case of success, the Blue Moon Mark 1 cargo lander will become the largest the spacecraft that has ever landed on the surface of the Moon. The spacecraft is over 8 meters high and over 3 meters in diameter. Engineers in Florida are completing the assembly of the first Blue Moon Mark 1 before it is shipped to Houston for environmental tests. After that, the lander will return to the Cape Cana for launch preparation on top of rocket. Blue Origin's new GL. Current company plans to launch a lunar lander on a new GLH rocket sometime this year. The first flight of an unmanned lunar lander will become even more important as engineers explore the possibility of modifying of the future Blue Moon Mark 1 spacecraft for astronauts. The probability of launching Blue Moon Mark 1 in 2026 is also 70%. Rocket Lab's Neutron rocket debuts. Rocket Lab confidently takes second place among US rocket companies in terms of number of launches per year. The light launch vehicle company Electron in 2025 exceeded monthly launch rate. Rocket Lab's next medium-lift Neutron rocket will open up the company's new markets. Neutron is designed with a reusable first stage and an integrated main fairing payload that will return to Earth as a single unit after separation of the disposable. The upper stage of a rocket that will accelerate to orbit. The launch pad on the island in Virginia already completed, but the rocket was not ready to meet Rocket Lab's goal of making its first flight by the end of 2025. But here, it is worth noting that Rocket Lab founder Peter Beck has a history of installing his team's ambitious timetable for the first Neutron flight. And that's weak. His latest prediction is to deliver the first Neutron rocket to the launch pad in the first quarter of 2026, followed by the first launch. But we are realists, so the probability of launching a Neutron in 2026 is 50%. First flight of Stokes Nova rocket, and right next to it is another rocket. Unlike Rocket Lab, Stock Space has no experience launching orbital rockets. But the company's founders have an impressive track record with many years of work on projects' propulsion systems at Blue Origin. The company's first rocket Stock Nova, officially scheduled for first flight in 2026. Launch pad construction. The Nova at Cape Canaveral is in advanced stages, while the first and second stages of the rocket have passed qualification tests last year. Engineers completed the first fire test of the first stage engine rocket in 2024 in Washington State after preliminary tests of the propulsion upper stage systems. The versatility of the new one lies in the fact that it is designed as a completely reusable rocket with a rotary booster and an upper stage. Stoke is the only company besides SpaceX that seems close to real flight tests of a fully reusable rocket. LEM is its first independent project, and spaceflights, as practice shows, still prefer more experience. Therefore, the probability of launching Nova in 2026, in my opinion, is only 30%. China's lunar rover debuts. China's goal to land astronauts on the moon by 2030 is now less than in 5,000 years, and a key test of the country's new manned spacecraft is scheduled for launch sometime in 2026. Partially reusable spacecraft Mengzhou, I hope I pronounced it correctly, designed to carry 7 people to the China TNG space station or a smaller crew during flights to the moon. It is to eventually replace the manned Shenzhou capsule, designed for low-altitude missions. Low Earth orbit. Mengzhou is an analogue of NASA's Orion spacecraft, or of the Apollo Command Module, and is a key element of China's lunar architecture, along with the manned lander named Lanier, which will make its debut in space as part of a separate mission. Launch will take place on the new Long March 10A rocket, which, according to the Chinese agency's manned spaceflight, will make its first flight with Mengzhou, likely unmanned, sometime this year. In recent months, there have already been fire tests of the accelerator stage missiles, and China usually does not publish launch schedules, not counting them realistic. Therefore, based on the information we have today, the probability of launching Long March 10A, also in 2026, is 60%. China's race for a reusable rocket, the first of several reusable rockets under development by China, was launched in early December. The rocket. The mid-range Beetle 3 was developed by commercial startup Landspace, successfully entered orbit on its debut flight, a remarkable achievement in itself. However, the Landspace attempt landing the first stage of the rocket at a remote site showed that the company was still close to recovery, and the reuse of the Zhuge 3 booster stage. The rocket failed during braking landing maneuver a few moments before touching down, after which it crashed directly next to the landing site in the Gobi Desert. Landspace will try again with its JOK 3, but other companies have rockets that will make similar attempts in coming months. Therefore, the number of attempts and the close success of one of the Chinese companies allows us state that the probability of a successful landing of a Chinese orbital rocket in 2026, it is 60%. Haven 1 launch. If we look at the open charts, the Californian company VAST has a significant advantage in the race for launching a commercial space station into orbit before the end of the International Space Station in 2030. The first manned residential module of the VA, called Heaven 1, is under construction with the aim of launch on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, after which the first of up to 4 visits by private crews to the space station are planned. SpaceX Dragon ships, each lasting up to 10 days. These capabilities are significantly inferior to the permanent presence man supported by the ISS, but the successful launch of Heaven 1 will be a significant achievement for the commercial space industry. You plan to create a larger space station capable of hosting visitors for extended periods. So, what current status of AVEN-1? The main structure of the flight module is complete structural tests in October and was due to undergo final weld and integration checks soon, The latest West's public schedule called for the launch of Heaven 1 as early as May 2026. However, it is likely that more time will be needed to fully equip the interior of the module. During structural tests this fall, its interior looked very empty. Therefore, the probability of launching Haven 1 in 2026 is only 30%. NASA's Roman Space Telescope. NASA's next flagship astronomical observatory is now fully assembled at the NASA Space Flight Center, Goddard in Maryland. The Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, named after NASA's first female chief astronomer, will have a field of view at least 100 times larger than the Hubble Space Telescope. The main scientific instrument, Roman, will perform large-scale surveys of the universe, covering 50 times more an area of sky in 5 years than Hubble covered in its first 30 years of operation. A secondary instrument is a coronagraph. It will expand astronomers' ability to directly image exoplanets. In December, NASA announced the completion of the Roman telescope, which began a series of environmental tests environment ahead of the planned launch, which is not scheduled for before September on the SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket. But in fact, the probability of launching the Roman Space Telescope in 2026 is quite high. I would rate it at 80%. China's Chang'e 7 mission. The next robotic mission in China's lunar exploration program is scheduled to launch as early as August 2026 year. Chang'e 7 will not repeat China's previous success in returning samples from Month, but will have its own set of firsts. The lander will attempt to land near the Moon's south pole and deploy a miniature flying probe to search for water ice in the so-called cold belts, hidden at the bottom of dark craters. Planned, the landing site is located on the edge of Shackleton Crater, which is near cold, unlit regions, which are thought to contain water ice. If successful, Chen 7 will be the first mission to which will detect and characterize water ice deposits on the lunar surface, ahead of similar US missions at least a year. And again, we're talking about China, so the probability launch of the CNV-7 in 2026 is as much as 80%. The rise of European commercial launch vehicles. Just as we looked at the emergence of reusable rockets in China, I decided to bring together new European startups with launch services in one place. 3 of these European companies say they are targeting the first flight of their small satellite launch vehicles in 2026. One of them is ESA Aerospace, headquartered, which is located near Munich. The company launched its first Spectrum rocket in March 2025. The rocket flew close, but ESA is preparing for a second orbital launch attempt on early 2026. Behind the IR is rocket factory Augsburg, another German company, which seemed to be on track to launch its first RFA-1 rocket, until a fire accident during bench tests in 2024 disrupted these plans. Spain's PLD Space is targeting the first flight of its MIUA-5 rocket in 2026, although it seems to be lagging behind EAR Aerospace and rocket factory Augsburg. Other serious contenders in the European small startup market are MySpace with France and Germany's Hilm POS. But both companies seem to have postponed their first orbital launch attempts for 2027. So, given the data we have, plus the enormous speed of decision-making by European officials, the likelihood that a European startup will enter orbit in 2026 is 20%. And that's only because we also in Europe, and this is more wishful thinking than reality. First flight of the Terran R Relativity Space is officially targeting the first flight of its Terran R Heavy rocket in late 2026. However, there are many reasons for such skepticism. At its headquarters in Long Beach, California, Relativity completes welding of first stage, second stage, and interstage adapter for first flight of the Terran R, and also installs internal fuel lines to supply fuel to the rocket's engines. Each stage is expected to undergo structural and acceptance testing at NASA's Stennis Space Center in Mississippi, before heading to Cape Canaveral in Florida for launch preparation. At the range with Tennessee, conducts acceptance tests of first stage engines and continues development testing upper stage engineer. The company claims to have already performed more than 300 fire tests of the booster R engine, and the construction of the AR launch pad in Florida is still ongoing, is in full swing. Therefore, the probability of the first launch of Terran R in 2026 is one from the smallest, only 10%. Eclipse's debut. Another rocket, officially scheduled for launch in late 2026, Eclipse, a new mid-range carrier jointly developed by Firefly Aerospace and Northrop Grumman. On paper, the Eclipse rocket is at about the same stage of development as Terran Air, the company Relativity. The latest update from Firefly indicates that the company has completed over 100 fire tests of the main Mirren engine for Eclipse. Relativity is already testing the upper stage engine, while Firefly is not yet has reached this stage. Although the speed with which the company is working gives us reason to believe that the probability of the first launch of Eclipse in 2026 is slightly higher than the AWAND is 20%. IM-3 Tar Vestry, the first American company to land a spacecraft on the Moon, plans to return to the lunar surface in 2026. Intuitive Machines is preparing to launch its third lander, Nova C, in the second half of the year, although the exact timing has not yet been announced. In their latest quarterly report, the company's representatives stated that they are targeting May 2026 for a readiness review for flight, final checks before sending the device to the launch pad in Florida. The first two landing Intuitive Machines devices overturned after landing, but were still transferred to limited scientific data. The next spacecraft will receive updated navigation sensors that should help to make a soft landing in the region, RER gamma side of the Moon. Secondary useful, the payload will also fly into space on the same rocket along with IM-3. Mission Vestry from Astroforge, a company that specializes in asteroid mining, will be heading out into the solar system for the purpose of landing on a metal-rich asteroid. Probability of launching AM-3 and Vestry in 2026 year is solid and amounts to 50%. Blue Ghost missions of Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost lunar lander made its first ever lunar landing last March, a completely ridiculous commercial mission to the surface of the Moon. The next BL Ghost mission is much more ambitious. The landing is planned on the far side of the Moon, but not before 2026. As Firefly states, this mission actually consists of 3 spacecraft: Blue Ghost Lander, Elytra Orbiter, manufactured by Firefly for data relay, and the European Space Agency's Lunar Finder Orbiter Agency. This will be the first American mission to attempt a landing on the far side of the Moon in 2 Chinese spacecraft that made such landings in 2019 and 2024. Update for Firefly indicates that the company is still in the early stages of manufacturing flight equipment for the Blue Ghost Mission 2, while the European Space Agency website indicates the target launch date no earlier than November 2026. Therefore, the probability of launching Blue Ghost Mission 2 in 2026, 10%. The first American tanker in geosynchronous orbit Astroscale, a company founded to clean up space debris, has changed its focus and taken a more profitable course satellite servicing market. Many of the key technologies needed to clean up space debris, including rapprochement and operations near objects, are also suitable for Astroscale's new direction. Last year, Astroscale launched a satellite that approached an abandoned Japanese rocket stage in low Earth orbit, a first in history with a space debris inspection case. The company's next mission should be another first: refueling an American military satellite above geosynchronous orbit at a distance of more than 36,000 kilometers from Earth. Although in fact, Western analysts believe that China has already carried out the first geosynchronous satellite refueling mission, Orbit, in 2025. But Astrosky's contract with the US Space Force has aims to at least repeat this result. The latest available schedule for this mission is scheduled to launch in mid-2026. Therefore, I still believe that the probability the launch of the Astrosky tanker in 2026 is approximately 50%. European Mission Plato, the European Space Agency's next mid-range science mission, named after the Greek philosopher Plato, may become the most productive planet hunter of all who ever sent into space. Equipped with 26 ultra-sensitive cameras, Plato will search for exoplanets, capturing tiny dimnesses of light as planets pass in front of other stars. Some estimates suggest that Plato could discover from a few thousand to a few tens of thousands of extrasolar worlds, doubling or even tripling number of confirmed exoplanets in the existing catalogue. Plato is specifically designed to search for analogues Sun-Earth system, potentially habitable rocky planets around stars similar to the Sun. Such objects are expected to make up only a small percentage of the total number of planets that Plato will open. Preparations for the launch of Plato appear to be going well. The European Space Agency reported that ground teams completed assembly of the observatory in October, after which Platon will spend several months in vibration, acoustic, and thermal vacuum chambers. The mission has at least 2 months of schedule headway, relative to the official launch date of December 2026. However, given that the launch is scheduled for the end of the year, even a slight delay could push the launch of the Plato mission to 2027. Therefore, the probability of launching Plato in 2026 is high, but not very high, at 70%. Gaganyaan Orbital Test Flight India also has ambitious plans for its space program, including a heavy-lift rocket, a space station on low Earth orbit, and eventually landing humans on the Moon. The premise for many of these purposes is Gaganyaan, India's manned space program flights. Gaganyaan has been in full-scale development since 2018, when it received approval from the Indian government. The program still has government support, but India has a reputation for being a country that, unlike China, which announces overly optimistic schedules for the first test flights of its space vehicles. The first unmanned orbital test flight of the Gaganyaan capsule remained in a few months for 5 years now. The first test flight is currently scheduled for the first quarter of 2026 year. The Indian Space Agency reported some progress in 2025, in particular on certification, LVM-3 launch vehicle for manned flights, installation of propulsion system spacecraft, and parachute testing. However, any schedules India should be viewed with healthy skepticism until officials provide more convincing updates. Therefore, the probability of launching Gaganyaan-1 in 2026 year only, 20%. Japanese mission to explore the moons of Mars. This is an incredibly exciting mission. However, the most spectacular part of the MMX journey will begin after its arrival at Mars in 2027. MMX will attempt up to 2 times to land on the Martian moon Phobos and collect samples for return to Earth. The mission has to launch in October to begin the journey to Mars. The launch was originally scheduled for 2024, but the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency postponed it due to problems with the new H-3 rocket. After that, the rocket. The H-3 flew a series of successful flights until it failed in December during putting a Japanese navigation satellite into orbit. Engineers still have time to investigate the causes of the accident and to return H3 to flight before the MMX planetary launch window in October. But the setback cast doubt on a schedule that had seemed quite reliable just a month ago. The fully integrated MMX spacecraft underwent environmental testing throughout 2025. The MMX mission builds on the success of Japan's Hayabusa 2 mission, which in 2020 brought samples from an asteroid to Earth. And if all goes according to plan, samples from Phobos are due to return to Earth in 2031. And yet the probability of launching MMX in 2026 is 80%. So, to sum up all that said, 2026 in space is not a year of loud finals, but a year of preparation, checks, and very important, if flies Artemis, we will see people near the moon again. If they learn to rule the elders, the road ahead will open itself. If the new missiles don't explode, more players will appear. And if they do explode, well, this is also part of the process. We live in a strange and at the same time unique moment when space has ceased to be exclusively. Daria is more like a huge experimental site, where ambitions are constantly collide with physics, gravity, and reality. And it is 2026 that will show who some of these ambitions are really grounded, while others are just good presentations. So, don't expect a miracle tomorrow, but look closely at each launch, every delay. And each one is almost a success, because it is from them that the path to great events is made. And as always, I will be there to separate real science from hype and space from fantasies. Thank you for your time spent with me. See you soon.